You're listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zinno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground Podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. Before we get to this week's guest, very excited. Why? For two reasons. One, it is our 300th guest on the Hazard Ground here, as we have been coming up on our 6-year anniversary. Just very excited to have done this for almost 6 years now and putting out 300 episodes of content that you and stories that you guys love to hear. So we're excited about that. But not only that, our guest is currently a military service member as a command sergeant major, one of the highest levels of the United States Army. We'll get to him in just a moment. But our first normal announcements, as always, with the holidays coming up here. Don't forget about our promotion with Amazon. You go to our website, hazardground.com. You can click on the Amazon button at the bottom of the homepage or under the sponsors tab. It'll redirect you to Amazon. You can do all of your normal Amazon shopping. We get a percentage of what you guys spend, and then we donate that percentage back to some of the great charities and organizations you've heard featured here on the show. It's also simple to do from your smartphone. It redirects you right to the app. If all your credit card information is saved, really user-friendly and easy. So again, hazardground.com first before you do your Amazon shopping here at the holidays. As well, follow us on all the social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at HazardGround, at HazardGround Podcast. And of course, continue to leave us those 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts. That helps grow the show, helps kick that algorithm in that gets us more views, more notices, more everything, and become more popular. We love this Hazard Ground community. We appreciate you guys being part of it. It doesn't have to be a lengthy review, something very short and sweet. Give us 5 stars, tell us why you love the show, and we'll even try to put you on our social media account as well. That brings us to this week's guest. Again, our 300th guest on the Hazard Ground. Very happy to have him here. Enlisted in the Army in 1990. Over the course of the last 32 years, among having assignments at every single major post throughout the United States Army, South Korea, Fort Bragg, Fort Polk, Fort Meade, where else are we going here? Back to Fort Bragg again, 25th Infantry Division, Schofield Barracks. He's got multiple combat deployments, 3 to Iraq, 2 to Afghanistan, K-417, several other deployments and mobilizations around the world. He is currently the Command Sergeant Major of Army's Future Command. And for those who don't know what Army's Future Command is, well, it's where the nerds hang out. But what they do is they basically get all of us the stuff we need to fight before we know we need to have it to fight. He is Command Sergeant Major Brian Hester joining us here on the Hazard Ground. Sergeant Major, welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate being here. I look forward to a spirited discussion today, and thanks for the great introduction. It's often when you hear somebody talk about you think to yourself, really not that important. I really haven't really done all that great stuff, but it does add up over 32 years, and I'm just really happy to be here and share some experiences and some ideas with you and the listeners.
It's interesting. I'm curious when you took over the 25th, because I deployed under the 25th with Major General Bernard Champeau was the CG at the time. You guys came in right after them?
Well, I got there in 2017.
Okay, so it was way after. Got it.
Yep. I was coming out of my third tour in Iraq and ended up getting selected by the now SHAPE commander, General Cavoli, to come out and be the Command Sergeant Major for the 25th Infantry Division. My first time serving in the 25th, my first time serving in Hawaii. What a fabulous place to be. I mean, obviously the division's got a long storied history, and a lot of people associate it with the Vietnam War and the things that happened there. Over 40 Medal of Honor winners come out of that division, so that's pretty amazing.
I'm sure you did the what's it called, the GAR, the Great Aloha Run, because I know in Iraq we did the IGAR, the Iraq Greater Aloha Run, when we were there. So
yeah, I actually did. I should have sent you a picture of that, because I actually have a picture of the CG and I and some of the other leaders finishing up the Great Aloha Run. I did that a couple times while I was there. Pretty neat event. A lot of community support. I mean, I think the first year I ran that, there was, of course, it was prior to COVID, so there was about 23,000 folks, running in on a small island. You think about Hawaii, it's only 123 miles, or at least, Oahu's only, 123 miles around. You get 23,000 people running, take up a lot of road space.
Well, you've had a long career, and it's funny because you typically start back at the beginning, but, it's one of those things where I'm always curious as you're still plugging away here, did you ever think that you'd be at it this long?
No, not at all. if I go back to, my little spot of the world, Mount Sterling, Illinois, and when I joined the Army, I thought to myself, well, first I thought, I should be going to college and playing football, but I wasn't big enough, strong enough, or fast enough. So that's a problem. I said, what can I do? I didn't really want to go to college at that point. So I said, hey, I'm going to join the Army. It's a little bit of a family tradition there. And I had no idea that I was going to stay past the first couple of years, to be honest with you. And I think one thing after another, for me, it was falling in love with soldiers and the mission and the opportunity to make a difference, and going back to the team thing, right? Being a guy who played sports from the time I was 5 years old until I graduated high school. This is really a big team. There's lots of forwards, lots of centers, lots of guards, and there's a lot of people that bring a lot of great ideas, capabilities, and a lot of passion to what we do in serving our nation. And I sort of fell in love with that. And it doesn't really seem like 32 years. I can tell you a really interesting story about it, though, because at the 10-year mark, I was sitting in a little house at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I was a staff sergeant. My wife and I've been blessed to be with her for 27 years. We're like, we have 10 more years, 20 years. You get your retirement in 20 years.
Yep.
What are we going to do in 10 more years? Well, that was 22 years ago. So it goes by fast, but it has absolutely been, with the exception of my wife and my kids, the love of my life. And my wife would tell you I probably put just as much energy in this as I do anything else. So it's great.
Yeah,
Never thought it'd last this long.
I've truly enjoyed all 23 years. I mean, it's not without ups and downs, to say the least, but I've always sort of believed that the Army puts you where you're supposed to be for a variety of different reasons, whether it's to learn something, to become a better soldier, become a better leader, because you're needed in a certain capacity. Just if you really look back at the arc of any given career that stays for this long, you always ended up in the spot you were supposed to be at any given time for any given reason. So you talked about enlisting, back in 1990. We're in a peacetime world at that point in time. Was the motivation outside of what you just said? I mean, was there anything about just trying to get to the next step and figure out what you were going to do? Do you have a recruiting horror story to tell?
Well, yeah, I do. So my recruiter, a guy named Staff Sergeant Paul, he was a really good guy, and I can remember him talking to my mom and sitting out in the little house we lived in, and my mom was like, freaking out. She's a great supporter of soldiers and all things Army now, but I think her experiences, with my dad in Germany during Vietnam, and him going to Vietnam and coming back, and so on and so forth, it was just kind of weird, right? But he was a really good dude, and he was a real straight shooter, and I transitioned to that to just a few years later, like 6 years later, I was a recruiter myself, and I thought about this guy, right? And I was like, he was a straight shooter to me, and I'm going to be a straight shooter to the kids that I'm trying to get to come in the Army and serve our country. And it was kind of the be all you can be Army at that point. And I, ironically, I'm sitting in my office, and this guy calls me on the phone, and he says, "Hey, I'm Master Sergeant Paul, and I'm a recruiter trainer at the Columbia Recruiting Battalion." And I'm like, this can't be the same guy, right? But he was. And so then he comes back, 5 years, 6 years later, after being my recruiter in Illinois, and I'm a recruiter in North Carolina, but Columbia, South Carolina, was where the recruiting battalion was, and he happened to work there as a recruiter trainer. He comes up there and he's like, "Hey, let me teach you the tricks of the trade." So that's kind of a weird recruiting story, but it is an absolute true story. So he comes and he helps me learn how to then frankly talk kids into coming in the Army and why it's important. And when you're 22 or 23-year-old staff sergeant, which I was at that point, you really only know so much about the Army. I'd been to Korea and I'd been at Fort Bragg, and that's really what I knew about the Army.
Right.
And it was very helpful to me. So I didn't really have a horror story with my recruiter, but I had a second meeting with my recruiter that was probably a bit of a horror story for him, but it really was a lot of fun, and it's kind of unique. Maybe other people have had that same experience, but it was a good experience for me, and he helped me out being a recruiter and really kind of turned around my success as a recruiter during that time.
Now, Desert Shield and Desert Storm kick off right around the time or slightly right after you get in. Was there any moment where you said, "Oops, might have made a bad decision here"?
Well, I don't know if it was, oops, I made a bad decision, but I do remember I was at Fort Benning, and it did kick off about that time. I got there on the 1st of August, and I think really, if I recall, it was the 2nd or 3rd of August when all the hostilities with Kuwait and stuff started. And I remember, we're in the reception battalion at that point. That's the place where you kind of do your in processing, and then you move from there to your basic training unit where they teach you how to shoot a rifle, get you fit, teach you about the rank structure and all those kinds of things that you need to know about the Army. And they brought all of us. There must have been like 1,000 of us at this point, right? August is a big time for us to bring folks in the Army. We bring a lot of people in during the summer time frame. Kids coming out of high school, coming out of college, so on and so forth. It's just a big time to train people. There's like 1,000 of us out there, and there, some lieutenant colonel who's in charge, right? I have no idea who that guy was now. Came out there and gave us all the big motivational speech. We're going to war, and everybody's moving to the Middle East, and I don't think I was thinking, wow, I made a bad decision. I think it was more like, wow, I'm excited. I get to do what I thought I was really joining the Army to do, which was fight and win our nation's wars and be part of the team, like I kind of talked about before. So it was fun, and I really remember that. And it didn't seem overwhelming to me, which maybe sounds a little weird. Maybe I'm a little off.
No, I mean, listen, my parents were all gung-ho ROTC until 9/11, and it was like, hey, you going to get out soon? I'm like, no one likes a quitter, Ma. No one likes a quitter. So, at that point, I was already pot committed, so it's neither here nor there, but I certainly understand it. Now, again, this is 1990. We have 32 years to get through, so I don't want to fast forward too much, but, between then and 9/11, like, what major significant things take place in your career that you can think of? Because obviously your career takes a different trajectory right after 9/11 and what goes on. But is there anything that stands out about that sort of 10-year period, other than your wife saying, hey, we only got 10 years left? And, of course, the world changed on everybody. So, that alone probably was enough.
Well, we talked a bit about recruiting, and that was kind of in the middle of that too. But we did a lot of really hard training then. And I think the one thing that comes to my mind a lot is we didn't maybe necessarily have the most technologically advanced equipment. We maybe didn't have the best. We didn't even wear body armor at that time, frankly, unless we were maybe doing a live fire or something like that. But what we did is we did a lot of hard training, a lot of stuff that was physically, mentally demanding. But we came together as a team. And we had that sacrifice. I remember going to the Joint Readiness Training Center at Fort Polk, Louisiana, and I think it might have been 98 or 99. And it was, we jumped in, out of airplanes like the 82nd Airborne Division does in the middle of the night. It was like 95 degrees at 10 o'clock at night. And for the next 11 days, it never got, during the daytime, it never got less than 100 degrees. It was grueling. It was miserable. But, that training event's about 17 days in total. And we learned a lot of really valuable lessons about ourselves and about our capability as a light infantry platoon and company. And I'm sure the battalion and brigade learned some lessons too, but I sure shit didn't know what they were at that point. But, I can remember having poison ivy that was the worst I've ever had in my life. And it was, you just kind of remember those things, but a lot of really good training, a lot of really good people. I tell a story a lot about, my first kind of squad in the 1st Brigade of the 82nd, 9 guys in that squad. I'm still to this day in contact with 6 of them. One of them is no longer with us. He's gone. He got in a bad accident and lost his life. A couple of them just kind of lost contact with, can't reconnect with. But I think it just really shows the importance of the human aspect of being a soldier in the Army and that connection that you get with people going through those really hard events in your life. And we just had a lot of fun. We learned a lot of really good lessons. We shot a lot of bullets. We got our first night vision devices together, and the big Haiti 180 turnaround that was getting ready to happen that didn't actually happen. Mm-hmm. And so it was just a it was a very informative time from a leadership perspective for me. And it was about being yourself, about setting a good example, about being we say a lot of times about how the non-commissioned officer corps is the backbone of the Army. Well,
Right.
we really trained hard at the small unit level, and NCO's got a really good opportunity to lead and make tough decisions in a training environment that I think transitioned well when we got to counterinsurgency. So
Yeah.
a lot of fun.
You went through a lot of courses in that time. PLDC, which no longer exists, or at least it's been renamed. You go to BNOC and ANOC, and then again, also been renamed. Airborne Air Assault Ranger School, all that stuff. I always ask this question to older folks or people who have been through it at a different time, because obviously part of our job is to be flexible and adaptable to not only the needs of what's going on in the world around us and the mission, but just, for lack of a better way to phrase it, the people who are coming in now are not cut from the same cloth as you and I when we came in. We were, I remember wall-to-wall counselings, like physical wall-to-wall counselings. We don't do that anymore. Good for obvious good reasons, but I'm just saying, the corporate culture of the military has changed. So when you talk to brand new graduates of Ranger School or WLC or whatever course that you had already went through, do you wonder, or can you sort of quantify the changes and where they are? And I'm not saying it has to be better or worse, but it's different. And why are we able to grade our differences now accordingly? I should say.
That's a really good question, and I think that a lot of senior leaders and even our middle management folks, in the middle, think about that a lot. And I think a lot of people say, well, young men and young women are different now than maybe we were in the 90s or whatever the case may be. And I'm sure they said the same thing about the kids from the 70s and the 50s and so on and so forth, right? And there's going to be natural progression. I mean, we're not the same. I think we still have our same really solid values. When we talk about the Army values and we talk about who we are and what we're built to do, fight and win our nation's wars. But when I talk to people, I tell them, remember what you learned here, and then with your experiences in your day-to-day job and what we've taught you in this institutional environment. I don't care if it's Ranger School or the Advanced Leader course or Jump Master School or anything. The reason why you're here is to refine a skill, and that skill is going to help you at some point, right? It may help you in a training environment. It may help you in a combat environment. You may not be the absolute master of it right now, but you're going to grow in time, and you're going to learn to refine that. And so don't think of this opportunity as something that you're just putting in the back of your mind and you're never going to use again. You'd be surprised how many times that comes back to the front part of your mind in your day-to-day duties, and you got to continue to learn and continue to grow. And that's the hallmark of us as a professional Army. We kind of hold each other accountable. So, we do that in a number of different ways, through schools, as you talked about, through operational assignments, through deployments, through fireside chats, through all kinds of different things. It really is what makes us a really good professional Army. But I tell them, this is a particular moment in time. Hopefully you learn something that's going to be valuable for you. Keep pushing, keep learning. We are a learning organization, and don't forget what you learned here, and use it to the best of your ability. And when you get back to your unit, there's probably somebody that's had a similar experience that you've had. If you happen to forget something, that's fine. We're not computers. We can't store unlimited amounts of information. Took your left and right and be, have the personal courage to say, hey, look, I think I might have missed something there. Can you help me remember that? And I think it's pretty valuable. And those are all great events. They're all informative events, right? Ranger School is informative. Jump Master School is informative. Warrior Leaders course, Basic Non-Commissioned Officer course, all those. Sergeant Major Academy, all those things are informative experiences. And they also meet some pretty valuable people along the way and build some relationships too. So that's pretty valuable.
Yeah, and again, I think we're always called to evaluate, what we're teaching, how we're teaching it, and why we're teaching it, and Moreover, I've used this example. It's like, my parents had to go, when they had to do a research paper, they had to go to a library to do it. I was at the very beginning of the internet. Like, I could go look on the internet and not have to go look for a book. And now kids nowadays could do a whole research paper on their phone sitting on the couch, right? Like, I mean, it's just, we shouldn't be in that mindset of, well, we did it this way before, so everybody should do it. No, there's a certain amount of adaptivity that we need to continue to grow with as things change around us, because our environment is never static. And I think, I just love to get people's perspective on it, because it seems like things like Ranger School, right? It's tried, tested, and true. The 9 weeks have been the 9 weeks for a long time, and they've done it pretty much the same way for a really long time, because the product that it produces is pretty darn good. And so from that standpoint, I know there are tweaks, obviously there have been along the way, but it's just one of those things where we are asked to do now more with less and more than ever before. So I'm always curious on where the perspective is from somebody who went through it, 30 years ago now, to somebody who's going through it now. There's a lot of the core components that are the same, but things obviously are different.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, we think about where we've gone for an Army. We keep transforming every day, and our people are part of that. They the way people think is a bit different. Maybe the way people act is different. It's all informed by the environment and experiences around us, right? I mean, if you ask me, would I be able to walk around and search the internet on a device when I was a young private, I would probably think you were talking about Star Trek or something. But I think, kids these days are I can remember my dad always saying to me, because I said so. That's true, because I said so. Well, I say that to my 15-year-old today, and he immediately pulls out his iPhone and he says, "Oh no, Dad, that's not right, because Wikipedia says it's this particular thing or another." So we do have that, but I think the young men and young women that join the Army today are they're really smart, and what they don't know, they know where to find it. And I think that's powerful, because that goes back to problem solving, right? And we, ultimately, end of the day, our Army or our defense industry is about problem solving, right? Some adversary wants to do something against us. We want to be able to solve that problem and have an advantage against them. And if we're smart enough to figure that out on the internet, perfect. If we have to get academia or industry or some scientist or some other person to help us figure that out because we haven't been trained that way, that's good too. But it starts with that sort of intuition of let me make sure that this is accurate. And the other thing, people often talk about, our young people are maybe not as physically fit or as mentally tough as maybe we were. We may just be patting ourselves on the back a little bit. Some of them, I believe, really are, right? The kids that play high school football are probably just as tough as the kids that played high school football in 1990. And they're probably likely faster and stronger, because programs have invested in that, and they believe in that, better maybe than we did when I played football. But I think young men and young women are still very talented. I do think that there are problems with things like obesity and other kinds of things in the United States now that are problematic from a military perspective. But I think they're smart, and they have good intuitions, and our problem really is about service above self and service to something, without necessarily that tangible return that they may see in other places. And I talked to them a lot about that too. And I just had an event earlier this morning where I was talking to some high school kids, like 35 of them. And I asked them, what their name was and if anybody in their family had ever served. And about half of them had folks in their family that had served. But I told them, I said, look, service is not necessarily all about just being in the military. It could be, as a firefighter, as a police officer, as a teacher, as a politician, as a guidance counselor, as the list goes on and on and on. We need good welders in the United States. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not it doesn't have to start off with, the United States Army on it, or the United States Navy, or whatever the case may be. There are great ways to continue to serve our nation and be a valuable member of a larger team, a larger enterprise. So lot of discussion about that in our across all the military services right now, and in our Congress and other places, frankly.
Let's fast forward, Sergeant Major. Where are you on 9/11?
You want to know exactly where I was on 9/11 when the airplanes hit the towers. I was in the gym at Fort Polk, Louisiana, with my wife, and we were working out. And we walk in the gym, and there was a couple little small gyms. Gyms weren't all that great back then either. They're much better now. But we walk in the gym. We're back in the little gym area working out, and the young girl that works up front walks back there, and she says, "Did you see the airplanes hit the Twin Towers in New York?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And that's where I was at. I was in the gym working out, and everybody has a tendency to remember where they were at that particular moment. And the TV in the gym wasn't on. I happened to grab the remote real fast, turn it on, and I looked at it, and I said to myself, things are going to change, and they did.
Did you know at that point in time, like, we're going to war? Good. You're like me. See, because I felt like I was the only one who was like, that wasn't the first thought. I mean, I'm from New York. I had family there. Like, I had friends in Lower Manhattan. My brother was working there at the time, so I was a little bit more frantic. I was trying to find everybody first, and then finally, later on in the day, I called up my unit. I'm like, "What are we doing? Where are we going? Like, what's happening?" Kind of deal. So it was one of those deals where I was just a little bit delayed, though. I feel like I'm the only person who didn't think, "Hey, we're going to war immediately."
I'm not so sure I thought about it. I mean, I guess I've been asked this question before, and I'm not so sure I automatically said we were going to war, because at that particular point, I don't think anybody thought it was necessarily a terrorist attack. Maybe they thought it was just an absolute uncomprehendable accident.
Yeah.
And then, but I would say by 24 hours later, I think people really believed that this was a true problem that was going to require a military solution, and it took us a little while, but we did in fact start that campaign, and it was a very long campaign. I mean, it still really is going on. There are still people in Iraq and Syria and other places that are still working on that particular problem set.
As an infantryman, were you in that mindset, like, let's go, this is what we trained for, I want to be the first one there kind of deal, or were you one of those guys who was sitting here just kind of waiting to sort of see the steps unfold before you needed to go anywhere?
Yeah, I think at that point I thought I had plenty of playoff games and training. I was ready for the Super Bowl, right? To use a sports analogy. Mm-hmm. And you want to see how good am I at shoot, moving, and communicating? How good am I at putting my folks in a position where they have the advantage, and so that we can win. I don't think it had anything to do really with wanting to have violence against one particular person or another, but we trained for violence. Controlled violence against our adversary, and I was willing to do whatever my nation needed me to do. Really, probably from the day I joined the Army, but I think that really galvanized everybody. I mean, people that were already on active duty, people that were sitting on their couch, people that were maybe for some reason or another were against military service. People that were against war as an activity. So to speak, and it just changed our nation in a really meaningful way very quickly, because it was an attack on our homeland, and mm-hmm. that hadn't happened, in anybody's recent memory at that point. So I was ready to do what I needed to do, and had the opportunity to do that a few times, and
you get to Afghanistan first, right?
I did. I went to Afghanistan in 2003 first.
Okay. What unit were you with then?
Well, it's a funny story. So I was actually in 1509th Airborne Infantry, the Op 4 at Fort Polk.
Okay.
And they, in the true way of the Army, there was a tasker that came down and said, "Hey, we need some people to go to Afghanistan and go all around Afghanistan and figure out what's going on good and figure out what's not going on so well." and it was called a combined arms team. And I got selected to do that with about 13 other people. And we went to Afghanistan, and we moved around all over the place for about 3 months, just looking at, where we were having success, where we were having challenges. And what ended up coming to that is we wrote a handbook on OI. I guess it was, what was it called? The Operation Enduring Freedom Handbook, or something like that. I can't recall exactly what it was, but it really was a bunch of great lessons learned. And then we, as an Army, we're constantly trying to learn. I mean, that's what we do here at Army Futures Command quite a bit. But it was, it wasn't one particular unit. It was just a band of 13 folks, like a little band of brothers. We had a bunch of different skill sets. There was a colonel and a few majors, and there was 2 NCOs, and I happened to be lucky enough to be one of the NCOs. And we looked at everything from how our squads fight to how our platoons and companies fight to staff integration, and we wrote some lessons learned, and so that was my first experience.
Were you sort of bummed that you didn't get the combat experience that you had sort of lusted for?
Maybe a little bit, but I got over that real fast because I was back on the train in a couple of months going to Iraq. So, but you know what? The funny thing is the first time I ever really got the shit scared out of me was during that CAT team. We're in a Humvee. We're riding along with some platoon. I don't even remember. I think it may have been 10th Mountain Division. I can't recall the unit, but they got a phone call on the radio that said, "Hey, y'all need to go set up this traffic control point on this road." And so they went to set up this traffic control point on this road, and we kind of herringboned off the road. Herringbone is like, you kind of peel off to the sides of the road. We're in this Humvee, right? Light-skinned Humvee at that point. We peel off the side of the road, and kaboom! The front of the Humvee disappears because we ran into a mine, of all things, right? I'm riding in the back of this thing, so I'm like, okay, this is kind of real, This is not, this is not fake in any kind of way. And it was a sort of a wake-up call for everybody in that particular platoon, but really also for me and the couple people that were with them from the CAT team. And it really was, 2003, Afghanistan was still kind of the Wild West. I mean, we were really trying to figure out some things there. And that was my real first experience with, life-threatening danger,
right?
Quite frankly. So I came away from it, thinking to myself, okay, all that training doesn't always necessarily prepare you for that split second, activity.
There's a gap there.
That snaps you into reality really fast.
Yeah. Real gets real. I want to ask you a question that I'm going to flip on you and ask you a little bit down the road. At least I assume I'm going to. But I assume when you went there, or even when you went to Iraq the first time, there might have still been some old Desert Storm guys hanging around in your unit, maybe even a Vietnam guy or two, possibly. But, do you remember any of those guys imparting some wisdom on you about, like, what it was going to be like, what combat was like what to expect? And the only reason I'm asking this now is because I'm kind of curious the same wisdom you imparted on soldiers after a couple of iterations that you got to be the guy who's the salty veteran.
Yeah, I mean, not so much like right before we started in Iraq and Afghanistan, but my first sergeant in the Army when I was in Korea was a Vietnam veteran, and he used to talk to us about his experiences in Vietnam, and we didn't have any Vietnam vets running around, kind of before we went into Iraq and Afghanistan in my particular unit, but the leaders were pretty smart, and they found some folks, that had combat experience, and they brought them in to talk about, kind of what to expect. And, I was, not super senior, but I was middle management at that point. I'm a sergeant first class. I'm a platoon sergeant, and, in charge of 40 men that are ready to do their nation's bidding. And, I think 2 things stuck out in my mind. one, it kind of goes back to the experience of the mine taking the front of the vehicle off. You're not going to know what to expect until you know it, and it happens, right? And then you're going to have to use your training and what you've learned together as a team to react to that, and hopefully you react in a positive way. And then the other thing that stuck out in my mind is sometimes the enemy is really determined to fight and win, and sometimes the enemy is not. And it usually becomes pretty it gets defined really fast when that action starts, when that firefight starts. You can almost immediately know, is this going to be something that's going to last for a few minutes, or is this going to be something that might last for a few hours? And it was I think it just gave you something to think about going into that. So it wasn't one of those things where you just snap and, nobody really knows what to expect. Because my whole platoon, at that point, I think I had one squad leader that had been to Desert Shield, Desert Storm. Everybody else had never been in combat.
Yeah, interesting. So when you get to Iraq the first time, where are you going? What's your mission?
So we went to Baghdad.
Okay.
We again, I was in the same unit. The OP4, our company, Bravo Company, 1509th, got deployed forward to 2nd Brigade 10th Mountain to help fill out. They had a couple of companies that were doing something else somewhere, so they didn't have full battalions, and they needed them. So 2 companies from the battalion went forward. We went with 2nd Brigade of the 10th Mountain 431 Polar Bears. And so we went to Baghdad, kind of started off in BIOP, and then moved up to kind of northwest Baghdad to a smaller installation, and then we really did a lot of what's the best word to describe it? We did a lot of patrolling for presence for a presence perspective, and then we also did a lot of work with trying to figure out the IED network that was pretty prevalent in northwest Iraq at that point. So
you get there in 04?
Yeah, in 2004. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I got there in 05 for the first time. So, I mean, you talk about that was the buildup, right? Like, I mean, that was, IEDs weren't really a thing after the invasion. It took us a little while. And there was a dead period there. Like at the end of 03 and 04, we were just sort of hanging around, waiting to see what was next. And all of a sudden, the enemy's like, these guys are still here. Let's just F with them for a little bit. And lo and behold, IEDs started popping up everywhere. So you're conducting these patrols. How kinetic is the contact that you're dealing with? How has the operational tempo there? And was it what you expected when you get there?
Well, it wasn't very kinetic from a direct fire perspective. I mean, we had a couple small engagements, but again, it goes back to what I was talking about. They didn't really want to fight us in a direct fire fight, And
Sure.
I think that's one of the reasons why the IED became pretty prevalent, right? You could, they could use it to pretty good effect, and not have to engage with a superior direct fire force. All right, you're talking about guys running around with RPGs and AKs and fighting against, us. We were just at that point just started getting up armored Humvees, and I think that they probably knew we were better trained to do fire maneuver than maybe they were, but they had the advantage of knowing the terrain and knowing the places to hide and the things to do. So the IED did become pretty prevalent. So a couple direct fire contacts, small things, nothing major, no major, we didn't have any casualties from any of that stuff. And that was the first few months. And then the IEDs really started popping up. And my platoon had really had 13 different IED events during that really about a 4-month period of time. Some of them were effective, some damage to vehicles, some we had a couple people get some scratches and bumps and bruises and stuff, but no major damage. So it was kind of a weird time. We were, as you described, there's a little bit of a lull there, and then we started seeing all this IED activity, and they knew it was a really good way to punch us in the mouth and not have to get in a sustained direct fire contact with us. Now, some of that happened, and everybody had different experiences, but that was just my
Right.
experience during that particular time.
You talk about that incident in Afghanistan where you get the front of your Humvee blown off and you recognize real gets real, and then now you're dealing with the IEDs, and real is sort of smacking you in the face again. Do you ever take a moment to pause and be aware of the mortality of this whole thing? I mean, do you feel lucky that nobody had gotten killed? I mean, it's just one of those things where everybody experiences combat through their own prism, right? And their own experience as far as of how they deal with it. And I'm just curious the mental state. I mean, it's very easy because we're trained to just turn it off, move forward, do the next thing, right? And we deal with it, as you said before, you don't know the bad thing that's going to happen until it happens. So you get yourself sort of in that tunnel vision. But every now and then, some of us step outside ourselves and start to realize, like, oh, shit, this isn't a movie anymore. It's not a video game. Like, bad stuff is going to happen here sooner rather than later.
Yeah, there's two things come to my mind with regard to that, and I think about it even today, right? It's not like a trigger event or a PTSD event or anything like that. I mean, but I do think about it and think about how things might be different based upon these two particular events. One of them I'd share with you is we kind of pulled into a patrol base. It's 4 vehicles. I'm the patrol leader. I got a couple of my squad leaders and a couple of my squads. We pull into this little palm grove and really it's for, we're on about, our patrols were about 12 hours at that point. We literally would split up 2.5. We'd go 12 hours. We'd come back. We fuel the vehicles. We'd pass the vehicles off to the other part of the platoon, and they'd go out for 12 hours. And it was, sometimes seemed like Groundhog Day. But the point I'm making is we stop in this little prom grove to, hell, I don't know, eat lunch or whatever, have an MRE and get some water, do a map check, send a report, whatever the case may be, right? And so I get out of my, I'm talking to my squad leaders. I walk back to my truck, and as I'm walking back to my truck, I'm like, I see this wire on the ground, right? And I'm like, what the hell is this? It just looks out of place, right? So I reach down, I pick it up, and I kind of pull on it, and then at that point I realize it's command wire. So I'm like, holy shit, everybody get in the vehicles, get the vehicles moving. Turns out it's, after we get the EOD folks in there, it's 6 155s buried in that little palm grove. And with the wash machine timer as the detonating device, it hadn't rained. Here's the ironic thing. It hadn't rained in months. They put it in a Walmart bag to keep it from getting wet, I guess. Well, the Walmart bag got stuck in between the two connectors on the washing machine device, and that could have been a very, very, very bad day for everybody in that patrol. 6 155s. We had vehicles that were sitting right on top of those things.
It wouldn't have left much left. There wouldn't have been much left.
It'd have been terrible, right? Good news is nothing bad happened, right? But I think you'd be remiss to not think about what would have happened if that would have been different. If that little plastic bag wouldn't have been in between those two particular the two connections on that washing machine timer, which was a widely used technique at that point in Iraq. And then,
did you guys talk about that event after? Did you guys huddle up and talk about it?
Oh yeah, we absolutely did. And I, there's a couple of guys from that platoon, obviously I'm still close with, and we still, I don't want to use the word joke about it, but we share kind of our thoughts about what was going on at that point, because we were like, hey, let's get the hell out of here. We got to move fast, right? And I mean, when you're in direct fire contact, you think about moving fast. I mean, you go back to battle drills and thinking about how you're going to do things, and that natural reaction to do things. But we were literally standing there. There were people pulling security, obviously, but there were people that were had their helmet off, drinking some water, eating an MRE, and so we had to reorganize really fast and move out of there. And so we share those things, and I think we get a laugh out of it sometimes, but not a laugh like, ha, that was funny, but man, we were really lucky. And sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. And that's a good example of that happening at that particular time.
Did you tell your wife that story at the time?
No, my wife never heard that story for a long time. She probably, oh man, I tell you what, I think the first time that I told that story where she probably had, she was listening, not that she doesn't listen to me because she does, but my son, when he came back from Afghanistan, he had a couple of his buddies that got killed in an IED, and it, he was having a bit of a rough time with it. It was one of the kids he went to school, like high school with. It's weird that two kids from the same high school go to the same unit and they're that close to each other. But so I told him the story, and I was like, hey, I was really telling him the story to sort of make a connection to say, hey, look, bad things happen to good people, and don't take this. This wasn't something personally that you had anything to do with. I used that. So I probably used other stories too to kind of help him out with it. And she heard that, and she was like, and this is shit. This would have been 2018 maybe, or 19, and that happened in 2004.
15 years.
And she's like, I never heard you tell this story. And I told her, I said, why would I not burden's a bad word.
It's not a bad word, because emotionally they don't know how to deal with it and handle it. We're a little bit better equipped to do it. Yeah. I think burden's fair.
Yeah. And so I think she was a little angry with me, maybe a little, but at the same time, I think after the anger wore off, she was like probably thankful that I didn't tell her that story, and probably many others. There's other stories that I haven't told her, and if she watches this, babe, I'm not trying to keep things from you. But why add another burden, right? I mean, you talk about burdens. Our families that stay back here in the relative safety of the United States, they and I know you've had a lot of people come on and talk about this too, but they go through a lot too. They don't know. They have no idea what's going on. The service members keep a lot of stuff from them for good reason.
Yep. And
then, when bad things do happen, they deal with it sometimes masterfully, and sometimes, not so well. I shouldn't say especially, but younger spouses that haven't had, multiple swings at this thing, sometimes have a harder time with it. And those people like, my wife and them that have to try to figure out a way to help them through that. That's a pretty, it's a hard thing to have to go through and deal with. And they deal with a lot of pretty hard stuff. And that's why they're really flipping amazing people. They stick with us. She's been with me for 27 years. She's been through all those deployments. And candidly, when my son was in Afghanistan, it was hard. That was harder on her than me being in Afghanistan multiple times, Iraq multiple times, because I think she had the experiences for me, and she didn't want to have that experience with our son. Thank God everything worked out. He's back. And
while you're on the subject, how did you handle his deployment? It's a game changer when it's your kid. It's totally different. Like I was fortunate enough to deploy both times, not married, no kids. So I mean, my whole goal was just keep my ass alive, and that was it, right? Like I didn't have to worry about anything. I never understood how. Now that I'm a father, I never understood how people could walk away from their kids. Like, I get it. Like, I understand. The bell rings, we answer, right? Like, I'm not, but just, I haven't been able to mentally get myself in a place where it's like, okay, I'm leaving. See you guys later. And now on the flip side, imagine my kid going away for 9 months to a year at a time. It's like, so how did you handle it?
I was a brigade sergeant major at that time. I was busy. No, I'm joking. I think, from an expectation perspective, I don't want to use the word worried, but I was probably more aware than, the average person who hadn't maybe had those same experiences. And I talked to him and I said, hey, look, you do your job, your duty, and you do it to the best of your ability. You take care of the people around you. You know what's right and what's wrong. And you're well trained. You're in a good unit. As a matter of fact, he was in the exact same company that I served in my first time in the 82nd Airborne Division.
Wow.
I said, I have confidence in those non-commissioned officers and those officers that they're going to lead you well.
Yeah, but how do you get out of your head? Because you know this now, and I've said this a million times on the show. The randomness of combat doesn't discriminate. There are people who have done everything right and ended up dead. There are people who have done everything wrong and walked out alive. There is no way to control the outcome, and you know this. So you can say all these things to your son, but in the back of your head, how is that mental, time bomb not ticking going, I can say it doesn't matter. It doesn't, there's literally no control to certain things that go on.
Yeah. I think I probably tried, like you said, I probably tried to put it in the back of my mind and said, this is not something I'm going to worry about because goes back to what you said. I don't really have any control, right? You can do everything right and something bad could happen. You can do everything wrong and something good could happen. And I'd be a liar if I wasn't concerned. He was in Helmand Province. It was a bad place at that time. And I worried. But I also knew that he's a good, strong kid, and he's in a good unit, and he made the decision to serve his nation in a time of war, and I was very proud of that. Still very proud of that, and he did a good job, and his unit did a good job, and it all worked out. But like I said, my wife, she probably, well, not probably, she had a harder time with it than I think than she did with me. Now, maybe not my first rodeo, my first deployment, she was probably pretty hard on her, but she, I guess, may become a little bit more accustomed to it. But I did worry about my son, and I'm a father. I worry about him today. He's 25. He's not in the Army anymore. He's married. We have two grandkids. One's 2 and one's 6 months old. I worry about is he going to be a good dad? Is he going to do the right things there too? So,
but I think the advice you gave him was the best, because look, I'll share something. And I've told this story before too. There were times when I was fortunate or unfortunate on my deployments. I was outside the wire 4 or 5 days a week. I might have logged about 5,000 to 6,000 miles on the roads of Baghdad, running convoys at the time that I was there in 05 into 06. So. You get the operational tempo there and what it was like, but there were days I'd wake up and I would just be scared shitless about today's the day. Like, how can we go out there again and nothing bad happen? I would be so overcome and so overwhelmed with fear and not wanting anybody around me to see it. I would sneak behind a building and I would just say a small prayer. And one of the things I would say was just, let me do it right. Let me do what I'm trained to do. Like that's at least there's some peace in that. And I think that's the best piece of advice you probably gave, is just do what you're trained to do. Take care of your people in front of you. Those are the things that I said to myself and prayed that I would do in those moments when bad things was happening. And that's really ultimately what you can control, right? To follow through on the training that you've learned, put others before yourself, and let the chips fall where they may. And if today's your last day, God willing, take care of my family. That's all you can say in those moments.
Yeah. And I absolutely said all those things to him. And I honestly, I think I've said that to thousands of soldiers, right?
Sure.
That I've encountered and had the opportunity to lead in combat and not in combat, right? Do what's right. Do it to the best of your ability. Lead yourself in a meaningful way. Be part of a team. Know that what you do is important, and know that if something bad happens, your nation and the leaders, me included, will do everything we can to be right by you and right by your commitment to service. Yeah. And that's it's easy. I've said it hundreds of times. It's easy to say. It's harder to do, and it is powerful when demonstrated appropriately. and we have a lot of really, really good leaders in our Department of Defense and in our nation that do it really well. We have some that are challenged by it because you can't do everything great. Not everybody's going to do everything great. And I'm very respectful of that. And I know, I've done some really good things. I've done some really not so good things. Not like in an illegal perspective, but handled situations, better in some cases and not as well as I would have liked to,
Sure.
right? The whole self-evaluation thing happens to me every day.
You can't do this for 32 years and do everything right. It's not possible.
Yeah, right. So, but the bottom line is, my message to people is, and people that are thinking about serving their nation is that it really is about service above self. There are really good things about serving your nation. There are really good skills that come from this. We are a leadership factory. That is what the Army is. I believe that wholeheartedly. From the time you come in, we say, hey, you got to lead yourself, right? Leading yourself is showing up on time in the right uniform, physically, mentally prepared to do what you have to do, and doing the very best that you can for your unit and the people around you. And all that stuff will take care of itself, because ultimately we're a people business, and we build leaders leaders of character, leaders that are disciplined, that are fit, and that are highly trained, and that are backed up by the Constitution of the United States. And it's a pretty powerful thing. And when you get people to buy into that, oh my gosh, look out. We can accomplish anything, anywhere, anytime, and we do, and we have done that for 247 years as an Army anyway.
Do you manage to escape all of your deployments without losing anybody?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I have, and I'm very thankful for. Thankful to God. I'm thankful to the men and women that were there with me. We had some people get bumps and bruises. Had an amputee. Had some other bad shit that happened, I did luckily not have to now. When I say my unit, in the battalion, in the brigade, we had multiple people lose their life in service to their nation. I'm very, very thankful to them for that.
How did that hit you personally?
I just think it really reinforced the power of people doing this on behalf of their nation and people and their way of life, right? This whole idea of the United States and the Constitution and all of that came because people were willing to ultimately put probably the hardest thing to give is your life. I mean, how much harder can it be than that? And they were willing to do that. And they probably got up that morning. Maybe they thought today was the day, like you said, or maybe they thought there's no way today's the day, right? And maybe it ended up being that day. I have been in close proximity to that, to people losing their life. They weren't in my unit, but it leaves a pretty painful yet positive reinforcement of why we are here and why we serve.
Yeah, and I asked the question just because, more than anything, it's kind of in your personal story, sort of, twofold here. I mean, you get to a point where you hit that 20-year mark, right? You've lived through this stuff. You've been fortunate enough to escape relatively physically in one piece and mentally in one piece. And there are other people who didn't get that same luxury. And so, it's twofold when I ask, how are you? Like, how are you responding? Are you aware of what you've been through at the time? And then two, was there a part of you that thought maybe it was time to hang it up and say, look, I've got my 20, I've done what I needed to do. I've done more than my fair share as far as serving my country. Maybe it's time to go in a different direction.
Yeah, I've thought that many times. But I go back to, I love serving my country. I love the people that are in the Army and really in the joint service. They're amazing people. And if I'm not willing to continue to put my my time and my energy, and if it comes to it, my well-being on the line for those young men and women and older men and women that are still serving. I find some real power in that for me personally, and I think about it all the time. My wife and I have this conversation, a lot. I mean, and even more now, right? With 32 years, I mean, and she's like, well, in some things, and I love her for this. She says that, when do you think enough is going to be enough? And I told her I'll know. And right now I don't know that. I know that I got more to give, and I know that my experiences can be powerful for the Army and for my unit. And I'm happy to share all those. I'm happy to give that. And I really do love being around soldiers. And there's nothing like being around a bunch of young soldiers that are passionate about getting something done, right? And when I say getting something done, I mean like lining the vehicles up in the motor pool, to changing out a tank's engine, to doing a live fire, to deploying to fight and win our nation's war. They are amazing people, and that if you can't get motivated by that every day, might want to stick yourself with a pen or something, see if you're still alive. So it's pretty powerful, and I do love it, and I also know that like it's fleeting, right? There may not be that much left for me, but I'm going to give everything I got right now until that light does come on and I say it's time to go, or the Army does says, hey man, you're too old, you can't continue to serve, you can't do enough push-ups in the morning anymore. So it's pretty powerful motivator too to continue to do it as positively and as skillfully as possible. And if I can touch one young soldier each day, one person out on the street each day, and they look at what we've done together in the Army over 32 years as a positive thing, yeah, that's pretty powerful.
It's the part I hate the most about being an 05 and an 06. Nobody wants to be your friend anymore. No, soldiers don't want to be around. I'll never forget the first time I took battalion command, and we had lunch, and I came late to it, and I went and grabbed my food, and I went to sit down, and nobody wanted to sit next to me. I'm like, damn, well, that's like cockroaches when the lights came on. Nobody wants to hang out with the old man anymore, and you get stuck. You just get so far removed from soldiers, and to your point, it's right. Like that's, if you like leading, you got to be with Joe on the ground. There's just no other way to do it, and you don't get that same experience anywhere else. I do want to ask you real quick about your personal experience, and I obviously whatever you're comfortable sharing, but with all that you went through, I ask this question a lot of people. Do you wish that somebody had told you, hey, take a break, like take a day off, give yourself some time to decompress from everything you just went through? Not that necessarily any of us would have listened, right? Because I wouldn't have listened, right? There's no way I would have sent my crew back out there without me, period. That wasn't going to happen. But there was a time and a place where someone could have said, hey, Mark, why don't you go just talk a little bit about what we just went through the other day? And do you think that if you would have done that along the way, maybe things might have turned out different for you mentally, or you might have been in a different space, or even some of your soldiers might have benefited from that, because we're so conditioned to accomplish the mission and do what's next. And I think that's a good thing. I don't want us to lose that. But there's got to be a balance somewhere, especially now knowing what we know about mental health, PTSD, TBI, and everything else, that maybe after my TBI, I wouldn't have just, went to the gym the next day and acted like everything was normal. If someone would have said, let's sit you down for 2 or 3 days and evaluate you here and just make sure your eyes aren't going to roll in the back of your head the wrong way. So where are you in all this? And again, I understand you're in a different position right now because you're still leading troops and your personal feelings may not align with what, we feel as a military, but I'm sure there's an answer somewhere there in between.
Yeah, so the easy answer is absolutely. I wish somebody would have talked to me. And I think we culturally, we have a little bravado that sometimes it gets in the way of us maybe sharing our feelings about things. And maybe some of that is good. Maybe there are some things that you should deal with by yourself. But what I've found is that the emotional release of talking to somebody about something can be pretty powerful for you. You talk about TBI, you talk about PTSD, you talk these different things that have happened to some of us. You can maybe talk to somebody that's close to you, and maybe they can relate to it a little bit, but maybe they don't have the professional training to talk to you about it in a more maybe, I don't want to use the word meaningful way, but a more structured way. I just think that talking to people is a good thing, right? And when I say talking to people, I mean talking to the people that you went through that with, because they can relate to you, and talking to people that are trained professionally to deal with some of these things is good. Talking to people that you trust that maybe have no real relationship to it other than the fact that they're meaningful people in your life is good. I to be honest with you, some of the things we talked about today, I haven't talked about in a while. So that, I think that maybe that, as I reflect on that after, this evening when I go home, I'm sure my wife will ask me how it went. And maybe we'll talk about something we haven't talked about in a while with regard to what we've talked about today, and that could be helpful to me personally. So I'm very aware of the power in having those types of communications with each other. Traumatic stress is a real thing. And it happens to different people in different ways. And we hope that people, are willing to come forward and say, hey, I need some help. And that is very, that is them demonstrating strength, not weakness.
Yes.
Frankly.
And
that's leading themselves and saying, hey, I'm dealing with something right now, and I need somebody to help me with that. I need the people that I love to help me with that. I need the people that are professionally trained to help me with that. I need the people that I trust to help me with that. And I'm willing to be vulnerable to get healthy. And I think that's very powerful.
I mean, I agree. Look, and I've shared part of my personal story here. I mean, it took me 15 years to literally sit down with somebody finally and have the conversation. And some of it was twofold. One, obviously, we learn to compartmentalize well in the military, right? We're trained. Everything is stacked neatly where it's supposed to be, and we can leave it there and move on. But the other part of it too is that I was petrified about losing my career. I mean, that was the other part about it, that if I start talking about this stuff, that I'm going to end up from this trajectory to one that is moving in a different direction, and I didn't want to give it up. And for me personally, push comes to shove, where it's just like I gotta. It's all the house of cards is all going to come crumbling down if I don't do something, right? So, it became a point of critical mass for me personally. But do we do a good enough job in the military? Not only in your experience, but what you've seen, beyond your own leadership experience, but do we do a good enough job at making soldiers feel comfortable that their career won't come to an end if they want to talk about these things?
Well, I think I think we do all we can do, but we can continue to do more.
Right.
We have to, the folks that are leading our Army right now have got to place emphasis on it. Have got to talk about it, and we've got to deputize, people all across the leadership of our Army to tell their stories and to be candid with people. And if they've struggled with things, their stories, telling their stories can be powerful to somebody else that then allows them to say, okay, I can tell my story. I can ask for help. Are we doing everything right? You know, I would say everybody's going to have to make that determination themselves. I've seen a significant increase in the ability for us to help people with everything from every kind of experience that you can imagine in behavioral health, post-traumatic stress disorder, in other ways. My message to everybody would be is it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to ask for help. Nobody's going to judge you. There are, I mean, I don't know the numbers, but if somebody said they were having some sort of reaction, negative or positive reaction to some event in their life, I'm convinced that nobody in the Army, no leader in the Army would say, okay, you are no longer a valued member of our team. I just don't think they would do that.
Sure.
Maybe I'm wrong, but I would stop anything and everything that I'm doing to help somebody if they said, hey, I'm having a problem right now. I don't care. There's nothing more important than people. We are a people business. We win with people, not with technology. We win with the people in our formations that do the fighting, and we have to continue to invest in them. From the moment they walk in a recruiting station till the moment they retire, to the moment they become a soldier for life, to the moment they go in a veterans facility because they're in the mature part of their life. And it is vitally important for us to do that as a nation and as a people. And it's hard work. And if it was easy, we would snap our fingers and we would fix the problem. But when it's people, it's hard, and we're all passionate about it. All the senior leaders in the Army are passionate about this, and I'm passionate about it. And if there's some soldier out there, or there's somebody out there, some veteran out there that's listening to this, they can find me, and if I'm the person that's going to be the person that's going to help them, I feel good about that, and I'm willing to do that. And I tell people all the time, I'm not a hard person to find, and just look me up. Whatever it is, whatever good idea, whatever bad idea, whatever problem you have, whatever solution you have to anything that's going on in our Army or in our community or in our sphere of influence, I'm happy to help take that on. And I may not be able to do it myself, and that's why there's so many wonderful people in the Army that are willing to pitch in and give a hand, right? And folks like you, right, that are telling great stories each and every day about the great service of people that are national treasures.
One more of my tough questions, and then we'll move on to some other stuff. But along those same lines with military suicide and veteran suicide, I mean, all this stuff touches each other. And I fully understand. And I don't say this as a slight in any way. It's hard to separate Brian from Command Sergeant Major Hester, right? Like, but in private moments, the same way it's hard for me to separate Mark from Colonel, Army National Guard guy, because I believe in our organization. I believe in what we do. I don't think we ever do anything with malintent. All of our intentions are good and honorable and noble, and we want the best for everybody. But that doesn't mean we're going to be 100% effective, and we have to own that. We have to own accountability for it. I don't think we gain anything by going, well, it wasn't our fault. Nope, can't, washing our hands of it doesn't solve anything either. So I understand the dichotomy that you're in as well as I am, but I mean, it's a lame question to ask. Can we do better? Yes, we could do better when it comes to veteran suicide, but let's phrase it this way. If someone comes to you and says either I feel like I'm having these thoughts or I know somebody who is, does the sergeant major mask come off and Brian step forward, or is it one of these things where we sort of have a system in place that we think works? I mean, how do you personally handle that sort of thing?
Well, I mean, I think that the Brian person comes out more than the sergeant major,
right?
Because it's a human thing. It's not a rank thing. And I think that's, some people do that better than others, right? So, but for me, when somebody comes to me with a personal problem, I wear this uniform every day, all right? And I'm very proud of it. But what I'm more proud of is being a dad, and, being a husband, being trustworthy. And I think that if somebody comes to me with a problem like we're talking about right now, they're going to get the real me. It's going to be informed by some of my experiences in this uniform, no doubt. But
Sure, yeah.
But they are going to get the real me, and I'm gonna give it to them, as real and as effective and as authentic as I can be. And I also know that I don't have all the answers, and so I'm gonna then the Army part, because the Sergeant Major part of, okay, I'm gonna take control of this situation. I'm gonna get the right expert, and I'm gonna get the right people involved, right? So I think first you're gonna get that, hey, this is me, this is you, we got this, we'll get through this together. I understand. I don't want you to think when I say I understand, I'm making light of it, but we're going to get the right people involved, and it's going to start with me and you in this situation, and then we're going to try to find a solution that makes this better for you and better for me, because now I own this thing, right? I'm the guy. You can't bring something to me like that and then say, okay, well, hey, okay, yeah, I got it. Let's go find Sergeant so and so and Lieutenant so and so, and they'll handle your problem. No, it doesn't work that way. When you bring these kinds of problems to a leader, I don't care what level they're at, they own that problem now, and we want them to follow through with that problem. So they're going to get Brian first. And then once we gain control, or at least as much control of the situation as we can, then we'll start to use the experiences and the access and the network associated with the office of the Sergeant Major, not as much as the Sergeant Major themselves.
Right. One of the things that I always, when it comes to that, what I always hold to more than anything is, and maybe just because I'm old, but, we got to get less technology dependent and more people dependent. I try to tell everybody on my staff all the time, we need to get something done. If you can physically go talk to the person, do it. You broker better deals face to face than you do over email or text, right?
Yeah.
That connectivity is what we're and it's the same thing when you're talking to your soldiers and you're checking in on. Call them into your office. How are you doing? Sit them down face to face. What's going on? What can I help you with? It's that whole thing has got to come back. I mean, and you can lead through email to a certain extent. You can lead through a phone, but there's nothing like your buddy can't sit next to a phone in a foxhole and go, he's got my back. It doesn't work that way. You got to be there with them. And that really is ultimately something that I try to preach throughout my staff and to all my Joes, that just simply, talk to people face to face, man. Get off the phone. Just go reach out and shake a hand, and the world gets a little bit different. Speaking of shaking hands, you finish all these deployments and everything, and clearly you're at a point here where, like you said, you could get out, you want to continue to serve, but you keep getting assigned to these bigger and better sort of units and jobs and everything else. Like, I mean, is there a point where you are starting to realize, for lack of a better term, your star is on the rise and that there is a lot more ahead of you going forward? Or are you just sort of like, they asked me to go here, so I went here. I didn't think about what was next kind of deal?
I think it's more of what you ended it with, right? I'm not. There's no illusion. People in the Army know who I am, right? And maybe even outside the Army, some people know who I am, right? A few people from Mount Sterling, Illinois, know who I am. But I think it's with the whole star on the rise thing. I think that's for me personally, that's kind of hard. I don't try to. I look at myself in the mirror only to assess, am I doing a good job?
Sure.
Not to assess, are you as important as you think you are?
Well, okay, so maybe I phrased that. I guess what I'm saying here is that, like, we're all compelled at a certain point in our career to evaluate what's next for us and where we're going to go and how we're going to get there. So, I mean, look, would I love to pin on a star? Sure. If the opportunity was there, I have to at least do some research to figure out what roads I could take to get there. If that opportunity presents itself, I can't just go, well, if somebody wants me, they'll come call me. No, it doesn't work. Especially when you get to the senior level, it doesn't work that way. There's a certain amount of, for lack of a better term, and this is definitely lack of a politicking, or at least, making known what you would like to do next in your career. And so when I say your star is on the rise, I mean, obviously, the positions they don't give them to everybody. There's a small list of people who get selected for X, Y, and Z to be in the final three, and then they pick somebody. So that's what I meant when I said that. Not that necessarily you were like, hey, look at me. I'm Brian Hester, and the world loves me. No, that's not what I meant at all, so I apologize.
No, that's great, Mark. I mean, so I think when I took this job a year ago, I thought that this was going to be my last assignment in the Army. I don't know if it will be. I'm happy to continue to serve. But I also start to think about, when in those moments when I have time to myself, which are few and far between, I start to think about, what am I going to do next? Because eventually you do have to retire from the Army, Brian Hester. I think to myself, what can I do that's going to be meaningful to me and to my family and to my nation and to the people I love and I like to be around. I have some ideas. I'd like to figure out ways to continue to give back to veterans, especially in kind of where I grew up. There's not a lot of people from that area that do join the military, but there's a few. There's a few people from the Central Illinois or the Midwest area that are out there. And clearly, there's a lot of old time veterans that I'm very passionate about. So I've talked to a few people about different things as to how can I get involved in that in a meaningful way. And I'm also a pretty avid outdoors guy, so I got some thoughts about maybe trying to make a living doing some kind of outdoor stuff. I don't know. I mean, we'll see what happens, but it's I think for a lot of us that are in the service, right? It's especially when you've been doing it for a while, it's almost hard to think about doing something else.
Look, you've spent more of your life in uniform than out.
Yeah, I mean, twice as much. But there's some good things. Me and my brothers own a couple pieces of property back in Illinois, and maybe we'll end up back there. My parents are still there. I also have these grandkids that are a draw for us, and they're in North Carolina. So maybe that'll be home, and we'll find some meaningful things to do, meaningful work to do there.
Just don't stay in Fayetteville again. Just don't do that to yourself.
Yeah, no, probably. I mean, you know what though? My first experience in Fayetteville in 1990 was significantly different than my last experience when I was there as a brigade sergeant major. It's a much better place.
Yeah.
But something to give back to people and to, and maybe, I don't know, maybe I'll go be a Cub Scout master or something like that. I mean, that sounds, I probably could do a decent job of that. I could organize 10 or 12 small kids to go on a camping trip.
Can you tie a knot, though? That's the real question. I mean, you might be able to tie a Swiss seat for yourself, but can you tie the other knots?
Something like that, right? So it's I just say the sky's the limit, right?
Right.
Only as much as you want to do or don't want to do, right? And I have a lot of my partners and friends that have retired now, and most of them wish they were still on active duty. Not all of them. Some of them are doing great things. Some of them are making millions of dollars doing stuff. Some of them are, living on their retirement, living their best life, right?
Good.
For me, I think it's somewhere closer toward living your best life. How can I spend some time with my grandkids, spend some time with my wife, my 15-year-old, and then find something else meaningful to do to occupy my time. And so I'm looking forward to that. I hope it's not tomorrow, but I do think it's going to be. I just think it's going to be a lot of fun when that time comes.
I want to ask you a question about your current assignment, because you said something before that I'm like, oh, he might regret saying that when I ask him this question. You said we win by people, not by technology, which is interesting given your assignment, because did you ever think that the infantry trigger pulling, airplane jumping, ranger tab wearing, door kicking infantry guy was going to be hanging around the nerds who figured out exactly how to make our phone geosync with a tank, a Humvee, an AH-64 all at the same time? Because that's what Futures Command is, right? It's like all the toys that we don't know we need, trying to figure out how we need them. So all you nerds got together and said, let's come up with something that we might be able to use 10 years down the road in combat. And these are the guys you're in charge of now.
Yeah, you know why? Because we have to have the advantage and we have to win. It goes back to that door kicking, rifle shooting, airplane jumping, experience, right? So how do you bring that to technology? How do you bring that to the integration of the human and the machine in the future, right? And then in the space where people are not going to be able to hide anymore, right? Camouflage on your face and a fighting position isn't necessarily going to work in the future. And so all that that science, that technology, that engineering, that development, that has to be. We have to have the chief reality officer to say, hey, can that work for soldiers, right? Can that work in the environment that we think that we're going to put it in, against our near peer threats, against counterinsurgency, and across the gamut, right? So the answer to the question is no. I never thought that I would do that, and I also never thought I'd be a sergeant major, but so it's the intersection. We bring these experiences, lots of experiences in 32 years, but then we bring colonels and other sergeants majors, and more importantly, we bring young soldiers. We bring specialists and lieutenants and captains and sergeants into these experiments. And we say, hey, look, is this going to work? Does the button need to be on the left? Is there too much, input coming in? Can the human brain take all that? Can we categorize it in a meaningful way to apply the resources the way we want to for the result that we're looking for? I look at myself as, can I be the chief, not the chief technology officer, not the chief financial officer, not to be the chief scientist, the chief engineer, chief reality officers. Maybe I should hang that on my door and say, hey, of all the technology that we're building, are we going to be able to use it in the way that it's designed to do, which is fight and win and give us advantage? The answer to that question is yes. Mm-hmm. It's not easy. Has to be informed by war fighting, because I believe that we are still going to have young men and women that are going to be at the edge, that are going to have to go the last 100 meters to make sure that we own that piece of terrain. And if we can give them a better piece of kit to do that, if we can give them a better way to communicate, we can give them a better way to see the battlefield. If we can shoot further than our enemy, if we can sense further, if we can understand better, and then we can do the door kicking, better than anybody can, because Americans are badass. They can do that shit. Yep. Then we'll be winning. So this is a unique assignment, and it's in a unique place, but man, it's powerful. The things that we're doing here are informing us in a way that we probably never thought possible before they thought about Army Futures Command. And the people that thought about that were really smart, way smarter than me.
As long as nobody in Army Futures Command wants to change the uniform again for like the 9th time in my 23 years, okay? Just can we just get static with the unit for a little bit? No more berets either, okay? Just, I hope you guys are smart, but you're not that smart. I kid, but nonetheless,
That's
it was
funny.
probably
It's
that was
funny that
probably
I
the worst.
sat on the Army uniform board the other day. We talked about uniforms, but we're not.
Oh, really?
We're not changing. We're not that I know of. Let me put the disclaimer in there. We're not changing that I know of the combat uniform. So
thank God.
Yeah.
I'll say, here's my chief reality officer check. The beret was the worst decision in the last 50 years of the United States Army. Period. Okay? No disrespect.
To put it on.
No disrespect to General Shinseki, but that worst decision ever. Period. That's just, that's Mark talking. Okay. Now that I'll get in trouble for that later on. I appreciate that. All right, Sergeant Major, let me ask you this real quick, and we'll wrap things up here shortly. Think of 2 or 3 of the most seminal moments in your career. What does Army's Future Command Sergeant Major Brian Hester tell Sergeant Brian Hester, Sergeant First Class Brian Hester at those moments? What are the words of advice he goes back and gives to that young sergeant, that young soldier, that he would need to know and stick with throughout the rest of his career?
A couple things come to mind, and I think it starts with I go back to what we do in the Army is we build leaders to fight and win, right? So lead yourself, right? Be deliberate in the things that you are going to do or you are going to say, and know that you're going to make some mistakes along the way, and that's okay. We all make mistakes, right? But the more informed you can be, the more deliberate you can be with leading your people, and then the second part of that is you got to listen to your people, right? It goes back to texts and emails are good for passing information, but they're not really as good for dialogue, and so be a people person, right? We're in a people business. Be a people person. Lead yourself. Be a people person. And I know some people are introverts, some people are extroverts. I'm probably really a little bit in between, but I've been trained for 32 years to talk to people, and so, and then think about risk, right? Because risk is an important factor. That we as soldiers and leaders need to try to be able to understand. Nobody's going to be able to understand all risks associated with all things, but at echelon, if our young leaders are thinking about risk and they're mitigating at their level, and then our middle management's doing the same thing, and then our senior leaders are doing the same thing, we have a really good opportunity to take some of the bad things out of the equation, right? So be a good leader of yourself, be a good example, be a trustworthy person, be thinking about the risks associated with the things that you're going to do, and I think we'll all be in a much better place. There's all this stuff is hard, right? And being in the Army and being a soldier and being a leader and understanding risk is pretty difficult, but I see people do it so well each and every day, and I think, man, why couldn't I be that good? But it's that's the power of all these people that come in the military and serve, and all the different experiences and great ideas and stuff they bring together. And so, yeah, I do it all. I mean, I just say I do this all over again. And I wouldn't, people always ask me, well, would you ever change anything? Would you ever do anything differently? And then, and in my moments of weakness, I'd think to myself, yeah, I would do this or I would do that. But I don't think I would change much. And that's, do what makes you feel good. That's good for those people around you. As long as it's legal, moral, and ethical, and be a trustworthy, good person, lead yourself, and understand risk, and you'll be a better person for all around. Whether you decide to stay in the Army, get out of the Army, join the Army, go play wide receiver for the Broncos. Whatever it is that you're going to do, those are pretty good things to think about.
Yeah, my only regret was whatever I ate in the chow hall in Baghdad that gave me dysentery. I wish I would have skipped that meal that day. That would have been enough for me.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, that was a bad 3 weeks afterwards, to say the least. But I kid. But listen, it's been great talking to you. It's been great getting to know you. I can say with a fair amount of certainty, at some point through my career, I've probably crossed paths with somebody who crossed paths with you. And you talk about that leadership factory that we are. And I am the leader I am today because I have been around other great leaders throughout this organization who have made me better. Iron sharpens iron kind of deal. And even at this late stage of my career, I'm never someone who isn't looking to refine and get better every single day and every single time I put on the uniform to try to be a little bit better than I was the last time I did it. And I think that's, that backbone of the NCO Corps. I've gotten that from many of the people that you've chosen to let along the way. And the connectivity between all of us, I think, is there one way or another, right? Whether it's units that we've shared or whatever, that mentality is born and bred by the people, as you referenced, the people who served in those units before and continue to serve in them now. So all that collective tissue and connective tissue together leads me to say thank you for everything that you've done and will continue to do going forward. Wherever your destination takes you, wherever your next assignment takes you, whether it's at home to the wife when she said enough is enough, or it is on to back to Fort Polk again for one more excruciating round in Louisiana. God bless it. How many times did you go to that hellhole? Beyond that, again, you and your family, the best of luck to your wife, to your son, your grandkids, and everything else. It's been incredibly great to speak with you and in your candor and your honesty, and I certainly appreciate it all.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. I appreciate what you do, bringing awareness and having these good discussions. And this has been a lot of fun. I don't often get to have 2 hours worth of fun in my day. No, that's not true. I do that all the time. But I mean, really just to talk and share. And I think that's very it's very important. It goes back to some of the things that we were talking about, being a bit vulnerable and expressing some of your own personal opinions that are informed by your service, that are meaningful to you and people around you. So thanks for what you do. To everybody that's out there, God bless you. Happy holidays. Safe travels to you if you're moving around. And then, we, our Army loves being our Army for the people of our nation. And that's about as true as I can put it from Brian Hester's perspective. And this has been a really, really cool last couple hours. Thanks for doing this for me.
Command Sergeant Major Brian Hester, thanks for being part of the Hazard Ground.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground podcast, hosted by Mark Zinno. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at producer@hazardground.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.